Okay, this is Pathway to Ascension, the Systemology Professional course. We're actually starting level 1, getting into the baseline of defragmentation there. Level 1, and this is PC4, or Lesson 4 if you're using the Pathway to Ascension volume 1. Or, if you're using the booklets, because we have the booklets now, I'll show you again. This is Handling Humanity, which kind of gives it away, name of the lesson. Handling Humanity, Systemology, Professional Course, booklet number 4. So, which is the 4th lesson in Pathway Ascension here. Handling Humanity. Handling the human condition. Level 1. So in this lesson, we're going to begin using the skills we've previously learned for establishing a formal session, or rather our presence in session, which is what, again, makes systematic processing possible. So we're going to start to apply processing to specific areas that are necessary for a state of, I'm going to put this up there. We call it beta defragmentation because we're talking about beta existence, we're talking about the human condition, we're talking about the physical universe. This material universe is beta existence. So basically the stuff we're most familiar with. And we treat that on the Pathway to Ascension with this professional course, essentially the fundamentals of beta defragmentation of handling the human condition are what we are treating level 0 to level 4, processing level 0 to 4. We are just now beginning level 1. Once that, as that baseline, that basic state of beta defragmentation has been established, we use levels 5 and 6 to kind of stabilize it and also to get us basically prepared to do advanced training, to apply what we call alpha defragmentation. Now, there isn't really any reason to get much into that at this juncture, but beta defragmentation. So, Pathway to Ascension Volume 1 includes the first 8 lessons of the course, and that covers processing levels 0 to 3. 4, 5, and 6 are contained in Volume 2, and that takes another 8 lessons. So there's 16 lessons of the professional course, level 0 to 6, so 7 total levels, processing levels of development. And then, of course, this is built upon the basic course, and the basic course actually has 6 booklets in the Fundamentals of Systemology, so that's 22 lessons altogether to get to get through processing level 6 with New Standard Systemology. So let's get right into it then. This, when we talk about beta defragmentation, what we mean is really like the handling, just the basic handling of the human condition and confronting our experiences. And we pretty much begin with, what's accessible within this lifetime. We're not excluding anything else, but we just kind of start there as a starting point. And then, of course, whatever else comes up, comes up. So for the processing that we've demonstrated, or I've illustrated in earlier lessons, we're mainly encouraging our seekers to just kind of push through, anything that came up, the resurfacing thoughts, any fragmentation, and just kind of push through, be able to focus awareness, and all of that practice. But at this level of the professional course, we start to learn how to actually handle the fragmentation, directly, to start actually scraping away these layers of imprinting and the considerations that we maintain about life and reality, that which basically as a result of various experiences and fragmentation. So this Lesson 4, Handling Humanity, it's based on the teachings that were previously given in the 2020 Professional Piloting course, which the portion that we're kind of adapting is presently in the research volume, Metahuman Destinations Volume 2, The Universe and Mind-Body Connection. But everything, you can always go back and look at where all of this has come from in our developments over the past decade, but everything that you really need from that's critical. And again, we're just kind of going through, I'm giving you the highlights of the information as they're needed for, solo processing, without a co-pilot, and also just the practices that we found that actually are effective in achieving the various levels that we've established, these gradients. Now, if you're really concerned about the hows and the whys and a lot of the theory and the development and everything that led up to this, there's of course that information too. But again, we've been able to isolate the most important parts for this. So the first real focus of the lesson, continuing from where we just left off with communication, is protest. The idea of protest. This is something that's probably of great significance or relevance to a lot of the social unrest that's been taking place in the world today. So, protest. Early on the spiritual timeline, or the backtrack as we refer to it, an alpha spirit goes out of communication, knowingly, selectively, self-determines, decides to go out of communication. This is part of how personal identity is established in some ways. The alpha spirit, imposes or creates a certain distance for their communication and then barriers to their perception. This is, without this, we would essentially be an integral of all beings and all beingness at once, with no conception of personal identity. So, in this wise, we often consider the individual's own spiritual timeline much like a personal identity continuum, that stretches from throughout the course of our spiritual existence. And it's essentially the zoo line. It's essentially a zoo line, like a track of our awareness that extends back to before the origins of even our keeping track of time. We refer to it as a timeline, but its origins are from essentially before time, and it began as a result of our keeping track of things and observing sequences and building upon cycles of various things, that the next moment is built upon considerations of the previous moment and so forth. That is what is essentially established time. So when we refer to time, we don't mean something subjective to just like the revolutions of a sun in the solar system and years and so forth. We mean as a matter of observed sequence, even communication. The idea of communication of a particle moving from the source point to the effect point is traveling a distance, and that kind of lag, or that the travel of that distance and the observation of that is what we usually chart as time. In fact, that's what you're actually, we don't use the term very much here, but that's actually what frequency is. Frequency is the measurement of a particle traveling as a wave from one point to another within a particular period of time. So now, as these barriers that we have established for ourselves, were originally, knowingly self-imposed or created on one's own self-determinism, they're usually able to be, sidestepped early on the backtrack, easily, because they weren't very solid. We made the intention for them to be there. We didn't have a lot built upon it to make it a solid, automation. So we could easily, with intention, undo such and such a barrier. This is what kind of gave the spiritual entities, prior to this physical version of beta existence, but spiritual entities, the not the illusion, but the appearance of having all these great significant powers and so forth, because these original barriers were not nearly as solid as we would experience them today. So in beta existence anyways. So but they're barriers nonetheless, and as a result, the alpha spirit could still be surprised, or suddenly encounter something that they weren't aware of or prepared for, and that became a matter of how we were able to be tricked and fooled in various ways. That ended up being used to our detriment. But before an alpha spirit begins to identify with lower material considerations for their own beingness, what they truly consider self to be, such as the human condition, we were essentially unable to be harmed. There was no substance to our beingness that we were attached to receive any kind of impact. So an early part of the formation of a basic spiritual identity, we still, however, will find personal preference. This could be even just based on aesthetics, our perception of beauty and ugliness, but it becomes an established pattern for us concerning what is acceptance and rejection. And this increases, unfortunately, the likelihood to block or misunderstand communications. And again, we were talking last time about communication and needing that perfect duplication for it to be clear communication. So our acceptance and rejection, especially when it starts to become a tendency that's set on automatic or that is no longer within our control, this inhibits clear communication, and of course our clear perception, because again, communication, we're not just talking about talking. Communication is also the receipt of data through stimuli being sensed using the body instead of actually perceiving it, and having to have those messages communicated through not only channels of biological wiring, but also this kind of etheric mind system and all of its circuitry and all of that before it gets back to us where we're actually operating as alpha spirits. That is a lot of communication. There's a lot of communication relays at play. And so in understanding one form of communication with our systemology, we're able to understand the communication as it applies to all systems. That's another reason why communication is inherently important at the fundamental levels of working up this. So now, when undesired communications and creations are being forcefully presented to the alpha spirit, or when their own communication and creations are being rejected by others, the individual may decide to protest that experience of either the enforcement or the rejection. This is an activity that, again, modern society is quite familiar with, so I don't even need to get into examples. However, when an individual attempts to communicate a protest and finds that they are blocked on those channels or towards a particular audience or terminal, when we talked about terminals as being, those things with mass, which are at the end of our communication line. And we're still talking about communication. I can, just as a reminder from last times, and so these would be considered terminals being used for communication. So when they find that they're blocked, and we talked about compulsive communication last time, but when we find that they're blocked, they generally will increase the volume or create something that is much more physical in nature and therefore more difficult to ignore. And again, this is something, we don't really need examples of it, but when an individual doesn't feel like they're being heard, they'll go to pretty extreme examples to make their message known. And ironically, usually as the volume increases and the fragmentation increases and so forth into the effort, the communication ends up becoming that much more fragmented. They actually end up, that which when our survival, when the automation and the reactivity and these mechanisms of supposed survival that have worked only on an organic level, kick in, which are intended to protect us, they're actually putting us in conditions and mindsets and emotional states that are actually the worst for our continued survival, and that actually prohibit us from thinking and acting clearly. So never, anything that's compulsive or on automation that's unknowingly and so forth, again, there's nothing wrong with alpha spirits setting this stuff up and intentionally, owning it and being aware of it, but any of these tendencies that take place on an automatic basis is inherently a part of the fragmentation that's keeping the individual alpha spirit entrapped in the human condition. So Um, Oftentimes, a protest fragmentation may be found at the heart of a compulsion or compulsive creation. This is why processing, only towards one's own acceptance of something's existence is not enough to overcome it. So the main issue must eventually be handled concerning all the flows and all the circuits on the channel. Rejection or lack of acceptance in both directions. We've talked about circuits, channels, flows. Even the observation of others rejecting something else can affect our own considerations. So communication barriers, they're the first factor of fragmentation that an alpha spirit, experienced on the backtrack. And so now, of course, because they were self-determined, they're not necessarily themselves the areas of fragmentation that we target when we begin our defragmentation processing. It's actually protest. The protests and the concept of acceptance and rejection is actually where we begin level 1 as an actual source of fragmentation. Because this is something that early in, it actually lowers the actual ability and awareness of an alpha spirit, and especially as the case with any kind of compulsive activity. So the instructions for basic protest defragmentation is to spot, which means, recognize, to look, spot, recognize something, a specific protest, and then identify what you are creating or doing to communicate that protest, and then identify who should have received or acknowledged that communication. And this is, as we work farther and farther up the pathway, one of the other kind of, keys to this that we can just kind of explain now, because we've been doing this enough that we know where we're going with it, and we know where what ends up happening. More of the processing is based on one being able to spot things, to be able to actually give it their full and direct attention and awareness. And by doing so, by actually spotting it, recognizing it, confronting it, so to speak, it basically relinquishes any reactive power that it might have, any kind of power it has to trigger our reactive mechanisms, being able to confront everything as it is, so to speak. So this is just an important exercise, and it becomes more, a lot of this stuff, as you work farther along, when you go back, you're applying more high power awareness each time. And so that it's not the methods themselves or the actual words or whatnot. It's actually, we're using systematic processing to essentially duplicate mental systems, but really to just be able to spot and acknowledge things and be able to actually confront existence and handle it head on as a godlike being would. So the methods in which we go about doing that, the systematic, crisscrossing and working through various levels and rechecking them and taking off these various levels of fragmentation, this is the manner in which we do this. So, a seeker's reach on this direct kind of method of processing where we're just, spotting and identifying things, it's going to be a bit limited during your first pass through the professional course material. So, and many of our compulsive creations, they carry with us as spiritual beings as protesting things and aspects of existence that, are not only long forgotten, but far and beyond what is found in this present manifestation of a physical universe or beta existence. So, as a seeker increases what they realize or are aware of, as they progress along the pathway, then more of this becomes accessible, and we've already kind of gone into the levels of knowingness and the almost knowns and so forth. So we've established now, hopefully here at level 1. Go back to level 1. So hopefully now at level 1, and in view of the 8 hours of instruction that have gone behind not only the Fundamentals of Systemology basic course, but the first 3 lessons of Pathway to Ascension, the professional course, we would expect that an individual is prepared to handle this kind of processing, having already done the former exercises and so forth, and that the semantics, some of the vocabulary that we're going to start using is becoming familiar with. We don't need to stop as much to explain, what we mean by beta existence or fragmentation or various things. So that's basically why so much energy and attention is spent during the basic course and level 0, because once we kind of have the means to take off, all we really have to be concerned with now is making for a smooth flight and learning some maneuvers. So as a standard practice, I introduced a basic form of protest defragmentation, more direct exercise. But, the best way to run the same area, we're going to just focus on spotting it and describing its specifics with each run, and this will allow the process to naturally shift to an earlier protest in memory that's in the same area along the same channel. This enables you to more fully defragment the entire string or chain, because at this point, when we're talking about total defragmentation, actual beta defragmentation, reaching that state of self-honesty, 4.0 on the standard model, so to speak, then we're talking about resolving entire chains of incidents and things that are connected, associated, not just one thing, not just generally the thing that we're having an issue with, or it's particularly turbulent for us because of it's stirring up things that, surprisingly, the things that have occurred, the more significant and the more fragmentary, to use that term, incidents that we carry with us are actually earlier on the backtrack. The stuff that we handle in the human condition, as bad as it sometimes seems out there, or the kinds of things that life is handing to us, this kind of stuff is really only restimulating and triggering, and then of course making solid more of that fragmentation and so forth. But the whole reason it has any bite to it or solidity to it at all is because it's all been built upon. So that's something that when we treat this processing and various cycles and so forth, the reason why we can really only handle stuff at a certain point or to a certain point with each level is because of what's accessible. And so as we start taking the fragmentation of the mind apart, kind of encircling various areas and then taking various areas apart, those other things come up, and then again there's more parts of that chain or more of that area that can be handled. And then of course we just kind of continue to do all this with whatever is accessible, until finally an individual reaches a point where they have a basic handle on things that really none of these elements are particularly that they're reacting to them and so forth on an automatic basis. And so it's usually, so by the end, that's the point we're trying to establish for the most part by the end of the Pathway to Ascension course. And then beyond that, the advanced training is then dependent on an individual having already achieved that state. So in order to do that, I guess we better get right into the processing though. So the basic outline for protest defragmentation regards, again, kind of identifying stuff. And in a PCL, or especially in co-piloting, it's a more fluid form of again, two-way communication and kind of trying to get an individual to observe and identify and communicate about this various stuff to the individual. For our purposes, solo flying, again, we want to treat these as steps, alternating, working our way back, not overthinking or getting involved in various thought trails and stuff. So the basic pattern, for example, would be what are you currently protesting? Describe it. What have you done to communicate that? And then who should acknowledge that communication? And then there's another step for processing that we would include, which is imagine them acknowledging that communication. And this is the same basic formula, this same basic formula for circuit 1, which is what is basically being treated here, can be applied to handling protests on other flows and other circuits. So if we're talking about total defragmentation, we do this with each of the areas that we handle along the pathway. And so introducing more of this now, we'll be able to save a lot of time later, because I'll be able to kind of identify various keywords and various terminals and various processes, and you'll be able to automatically know how those all work with the various circuits and flows. So we'll just, we'll pick this one down. So for like circuit 2, it would be, what about you is someone else protesting? And then what have they done to communicate that? And how could that be acknowledged? And then in this case, the imagine step would be imagining them receiving your acknowledgement. And for circuit 3, it would be, what are others protesting? What have they done to communicate that? Who should acknowledge that communication? And imagine them receiving the acknowledgement. So as systematic processing becomes more intricate and specific in various areas, these formulas, these basic, processing command lines that are given in the text, they're intended to apply to, all kinds of various terminals, person, place, thing, again, something with mass. And as a seeker progresses on the pathway, there's going to be certain areas that'll be found to be more turbulent than others. And then those are targeted, the ones that we found that seem to be key areas that a lot of fragmentation surrounds, we've targeted and we handle directly. The manner in which they're fragmented, or to what extent that turbulence is experienced, is going to be individual, based on one's own, accumulation of experiences based on that individual. So, but we've been able to at least target the key areas to make the pathway effective, at least. The ones that can, inhibit an individual from basically handling the rest. Once we target these key areas along the pathway, the handling of the other details, an individual is equipped to do that. So we've been able to, again, focus on the stuff that, the most important stuff in this course. So now, for example, what have you protested about blank? Is directly applied to any specific area or terminal that is considered a source of turbulence or fragmentation. So in traditional piloting, there might be a list already prepared for a seeker, and that's either one that they've received from us with just the list of common terminals, or preferably one that's been established based on earlier sessions. So a list of key terminals or key trouble areas is being accumulated by the pilot, so that when the seeker returns, they know what to focus on in various areas. And this is something, again, if you're flying solo, then it's really your responsibility to keep track of the various terminals in the various areas that you consider significant or of particular turbulence to you. So, if when we do this with a terminal list, if the answer is nothing, then you just move on to the next one without processing it further. So without having a specialized list personalized for an individual, the best way to treat it, we talked about the spheres of existence. The best way to treat and handle basic terminals is with the spheres of existence. And so, in the first sphere of existence, for example, with self, obviously the body would be, a key element there. In the second sphere, we have home or family. In the third sphere of groups, job, society, individual groups. then of course the fourth sphere, humans, fifth sphere, life on Earth, physical universe, sixth sphere, and so on. So, the processing formula then would be, what have you protested about, for example, your family or that body or, the job or whatever. And then, moving down the formula, what did you do or create to protest that? And that's in lieu of saying communicate. And then see the third one, who should have acknowledged it. And then instead of imagining in general processing formula like this, we would spot an earlier protest and then repeat those steps of, what was being protested, what did you do or communicate or create to protest that, and then the acknowledgement. And a seeker will generally run this until feeling an increased relief in a certain area and use that as the endpoint. This type of processing is also helpful for those seekers that at first do not find accessible answers to the more direct entry-level approach of what are you currently protesting. And that's, that comment I make, again, it's typically, if you just ask, what are you currently protesting, or, in session, or you read that as a PCL for solo, or you use that as, Copilot, generally the reactive answer is nothing or something. So what we're looking for here is, being able to target it with specific terminals, whatever is those might be specific to that individual. And in this particular course, now there are ways of doing this with biofeedback, GSR metering biofeedback, in which case you could go through a list and say, what are you protesting, or are you protesting anything about your body? Are you and basically using the GSR biofeedback to kind of home in on what is the trouble areas or whatever an individual. We do have courses and materials that concern that. Again, my goal for this Pathway to Ascension professional course is specifically on, even if it takes several runs through the levels or it takes a little longer, the big experiment that led to developing this was, could an individual do it alone, and was that even possible to do it without co-piloting? And we found that it was. And was it even possible to do without the GSR metering, which is something that we experimented with extensively with our co-piloting? And we found that it was. It required much more, and that's why we spent so much attention on presence in session and awareness and running and processes leading up to this area, because without the GSR meter and without a co-pilot, this fundamental work leading up to this point in the course, including the basic course, was the minimum necessary that an individual would need to be able to move themselves along the pathway. Is it all that was, could be said? Or no, of course not. But we basically tried to just isolate the minimum of what was necessary. So that's the basic processing formula for that. And when a seeker is comfortable with the results of any particular process, or when an endpoint is reached on what's presently accessible, deeper information may usually be scouted by reshaping, for example, the PCL or formula as a direction to imagine something. In this case, the wording could be changed to what might you protest, or what would be a communication, something like that. The goal really to be just to shine awareness on new layers. So, and again, if any of this seems, too out of reach for you right now, all you have to do is just take it up on additional passes through the professional course. That's the other thing that we found for those that were going to be doing the solo and without the meter, was the trick was to just move through it fluidly as best as possible, with whatever you had reality on, or whatever seemed to be actually producing, those results to the point that they could, and then just return to this stuff again later and make additional passes over it, rather than, getting getting really fixated and stuck into any one area of this and just not moving further and just leaving it at that. It's better to actually move through, at least as the directions are given within the course and as I'm relaying them, through 0 to 4. Work your way through 0 to 4, 0 to 4, 0 to 4. Take as many passes at that as you really need to. And don't worry about any of the rest. You can also accent it with levels 5 and 6 because you won't get into trouble with that. Levels 5 and 6 are simply not intended as beta defragmentation. So they help stabilize it, they help improve abilities, they help get an individual ready for the advanced training, but they are not, the techniques and the matters that are discussed in 5 and 6 are not inherently a part of what is absolutely necessary to achieve beta defragmentation. So that's what we're dealing with there.
The Joshua Free Imprint, JFI Publications, in conjunction with Mardukite Academy and the Systemology Society, present the single greatest breakthrough of the 21st century for all humanity, the perfection of a new standard systemology, a complete map for the way out from the bottom to the top, and your key to being an ascended master in this lifetime. Everything you need is contained in 3 progressive, self-guiding courses: the Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course, the Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, and the Keys to the Kingdom Advanced Training Course. And each should be studied and applied in their intended sequence and order as displayed in this video. All 3 courses combined are available as 5 standard hardcover volumes, but also as 33 installments, since each single course lesson is also available individually as a pocket-sized manual. The Fundamentals of Systemology Basic Course includes Being More Than Human, Realities in Agreement, Windows to Experience, Ancient Systemology, A History of Systemology, and Systemology Processing. The Pathway to Ascension Professional Course, including processing levels 0 through 6, includes in Volume 1, Increasing Awareness, Thought and Emotion, Clear Communication, Handling Humanity, Free Your Spirit, Escaping Spirit Traps, Eliminating Barriers, and Conquest of Illusion. The Pathway to Ascension Volume 2 includes Confronting the Past, Lifting the Veils, Spiritual Implants, Games and Universes, Spiritual Energy, Spiritual Machinery, The Arcs of Infinity, and Alpha Thought. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 7 in Volume 1 includes The Secret of Universes, Games, Goals, and Purposes, The Jewel of Knowledge, Implanted Universes, and the Supplementals Systemology Biofeedback and Systemology Procedures. The Keys to the Kingdom AT Advanced Training Course for Processing Level 8 in Volume 2 includes Entities and Fragments, Spiritual Perception, Mastering Ascension, Advancing Systemology, and the AT Supplement Systemology Piloting. All titles are available from your favorite bookseller. Explore new standard systemology today, and may you never be the same.